Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and fellow colleagues. Welcome to the CSIS Indo-Pacific Seminar on Canada's Indo-Pacific Strategy. This event is made publicly available through our live stream feed at CSIS YouTube channel. A very quick housekeeping announcements before we get the event starting. The event will run for approximately 2 hours to 11:30 or 11:30. And lunch will then be served at the pre-function room, which is just right the auditorium. And now let's move on to the first order of the business. We will have an opening remark from CSIS and the Embassy of Canada. And now may I first invite Dr. Shafia Muhibat, Deputy Executive Director for Research of CSIS, to present her opening remarks, please.
Very good morning and welcome to all of the distinguished speakers and also participants to today's event, CSIS Indo-Pacific Seminar on Canada Indo-Pacific Strategy. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome everyone at the CSIS auditorium today, and also to those of you joining us through our YouTube channel. We are very honored today to be able to welcome all of you, but especially, of course, Her Excellency Ambassador Nadia Burger, the Ambassador of Canada to the Republic of Indonesia and the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, as our main speaker today. I would also like to extend my warmest welcome to Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro, the Director General of ASEAN Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. And of course, another discussant is my colleague, Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director of CSIS. Ladies and gentlemen, I think our today's topic is something that CSIS has been involved in for the past at least 5 years, if not more, as Indo-Pacific has always been considered highly strategic, but also a convoluted region. CSIS has been concerned about great power competition that has been the strongest narrative in the region through different conceptions of Indo-Pacific. So we've done quite a lot of studies and publications with regards to this particular issue. The competitive nature of the region could bring some potentially dire consequences for a lot of states in the region, including Indonesia, which includes the shifting dynamics in the security cooperation and the weakening of regional institutions. Again, and in today's seminar, we will hear and discuss further the recently launched Canada's Indo-Pacific Strategy. The strategy includes a comprehensive roadmap to deepen Canada's engagement through various forms of cooperation, including but not limited to security cooperation, economic cooperation, sustainable development goals, and people-to-people engagement. And again, for us in CSIS, and I think throughout Southeast Asia, Canada's Indo-Pacific Strategy has been one document that we were very much looking forward to, as it adds to the growing dynamics of how Indo-Pacific is understood in the region and how the interaction among countries in the region are defined. And this is particularly important because Canada is also one of the most important partners for ASEAN. It has become a dialogue partner for ASEAN for the longest time, I think, and has signed a strategic partnership as recently as last year. And ASEAN is also Canada's 4th largest trading partner. And meanwhile, in the region, ASEAN, we still consider ASEAN as the driver of regional cooperation, and tries to maintain the centrality by having its own ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which was introduced in 2019. The outlook serves as a reminder that ASEAN continues to seek to play a central role in an inclusive and mutually beneficial regional cooperation. While, we have to admit, and I think CSI studies have put this forward a number of times, that the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific has not been properly mainstreamed, but I think it has, been mentioned that Indonesia will try to implement the AOIP this year during its chairmanship. And I think this is one discussion that we also look forward today, whether or not, how the AOIP and Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy would have its either overlaps or points of cooperation. So such is the situation in the Indo-Pacific at present, allows for a lot of opportunities between ASEAN and its dialogue partners, including Canada, and as well as other relevant parties. So therefore, I very much look forward to hear and discuss how Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy will promote inclusive regional cooperation with other stakeholders in the region. Furthermore, I am personally interested to hear, what Canada will offer for the countries in the region, both in the short term and also the long term. So I very much look forward to a deep and fruitful discussion. And thank you again for joining us here today at CSIS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shafia. Next, may I have Mr. Richard Labarre, Charge d'Affaires of the Cabinet of Canada, to present his opening remarks.
Thank you. And when the ambassador is around, I am certainly not a chargé. His Excellency, Ambassador Suryodipuro, Director General of ASEAN Corporation, Bapak Yose, Rizal Damuri, CSIS Executive Director, Dr. Lina Alexandra, CSIS Head of Department of International Relations, colleagues, friends of Canada. Selamat pagi dan salaman sejahtera. It's my pleasure to join with you today as we discuss Canada's highly anticipated Indo-Pacific strategy. This will be a transformation plan for Canada's engagement in the world's fastest growing, most dynamic region. So it's no accident that we asked for Dr. Lina and Jakarta's own Center for Strategic and International Studies to help us present the strategy to our friends in Indonesia. We are very pleased to be reviewing and reinvigorating our relationship with CSIS, just as we do so with the wider region. We count on your expertise, analysis, and access to build bridges between Canada and Indonesia, irrespective of the great physical distance. Of course, that's our primary responsibility at the Canadian Embassy to Indonesia. And who better to present our Indo-Pacific strategy than our Ambassador, Her Excellency Nadia Burger. I will start by saying it's an honor to introduce her. I've got to keep being on her good side as my boss. Ambassador Burger is truly an Asia hand. She most recently held the senior role of Deputy Head of Mission at our embassy in Tokyo and was previously posted to China. Southeast Asia is also familiar territory. She served as Director for Southeast Asia and the Pacific at a time when Canada was strengthening its ASEAN engagement. I won't say much more as I definitely don't want to preempt my ambassador's presentation, but I would like to acknowledge DG Arto from Kemlu. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your very hectic schedule in your ASEAN chairmanship to join us and share your expertise and insights. And thank you also, Dr. Lina and Bapak Yose, for facilitating today's event. I look forward to our discussions today. Merci, thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Labarre. Ladies and gentlemen, the next session of the agenda will be the presentation, followed by a discussion of the Canadian strategy on the Indo-Pacific. Now may I call upon all the panelists of the session to come on stage. Her Excellency Ambassador Nadia Burger, excuse my French, Ambassador of Canada to the Republic of Indonesia and Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro, Director General of ASEAN Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Dr. Lina Alexandra, Head of the Department of the International Relations, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Please take your seat at the stage. I would now hand over the floor to Dr. Lina as the moderator of the session. Please.
Thank you very much, Gilang. Once again, good morning to everyone and welcome to CSIS. And thank you so much for spending your time this morning on a very important topic that we have today, that we would like to hear about Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think by having or organizing this seminar today, we all agree on the strategic importance of Indo-Pacific as a concept. Why is it important? Especially because we see the challenges as well as opportunities in the rising Indo-Pacific construct. Challenges, I think we have to be honest. The points, particularly due to the intensifying major power that is happening Pacific region, and as well as opportunities. We see also a lot of new areas of cooperation that can be done within this Indo-Pacific in order to deal with the common challenges that countries are facing. But I think what is even more important, why we are happy to have this event this morning, is because there is a necessity to flesh out the Indo-Pacific strategy or concept from the so-called middle powers countries, as their particular interpretation of Indo-Pacific tend to be more open, inclusive, normative, as well as seeking to invest on multilateral cooperation rather than sharpening the existing divides among countries. And in this context, I believe Canada and Indonesia are part of this group of middle powers. And especially I think it has been mentioned earlier about that we in ASEAN, we have the so-called ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Well, it is clear from the term itself, it is still an outlook. So we would like to see whether there has been a projection that this outlook will turn into a strategy in the future. Therefore, I think this kind of discussion is very significant, again, to bring middle powers to work together toward a peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific which benefits all. With that introduction, I would like now to give the first floor, of course, to Ambassador Nadia Burger to give your presentation. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dr. Lina. And I've been given a clicker, so that means people trust me with this device, hopefully. I will not need any further assistance. So as I was kindly introduced, I would like to also recognize the presence of Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro, Director General of the ASEAN Cooperation Section at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bapak Yose Rizal Damuri, CSIS Executive Director. Ibu-ibu, bapak-bapak, teman-teman saya, selamat pagi. I'm really delighted to be with you all here today in Jakarta to talk about a topic that is very dear to my heart, which is Canada's new Indo-Pacific strategy. And I would like to thank our host in particular, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, for bringing us here today together to have that conversation and also to talk about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. I think this will be a very fruitful and interesting discussion. As you may have read it, or as you may have heard, this strategy, this new Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada, is a very significant strategy for us. It's basically a new governance framework for our engagement over the next 10 years. And we've already set aside 2.3 billion Canadian dollars for initiatives that fall under it. And this will be for the first 5 years. We'll reassess, and then we will continue for another 5 years and then take stock. So move to the first slide. Can you all hear me well? There's a bit of echo here. Good. First slide. The Indo-Pacific region is really, in our view, at the center of a major global shift in power. And every issue that matters to Canadian and to Canada is basically relevant to the region. And for example, our security, prosperity, health, environment are all shaped by developments in the region. And they're also shaped by the relationship that Canada has with countries in the regions, including Indonesia. So this demands a response from Canada that is not only comprehensive, but enduring. And Pak Arto and I were talking about that importance of the enduring part. And this response is firmly rooted in our strength, our value added, and global priorities. Our strategy seeks to reinforce key partnerships to support a more secure, prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable region. And we want to do our part in that regard. And in doing so, we reaffirm our respect for the sovereignty of other states and the fact that the rules-based international system is a cornerstone to our prosperity and our security, and also our ability to solve shared problems. Many people say, what is the Indo-Pacific strategy? What will Canada want to do? That was a question we heard, and this is what I will be talking about for the next few minutes. So in this slide, you see that we have 5 integrated strategic objectives. And our strategy address all of them. The first one, of course, promoting peace, resilience, and security. Second one, expanding trade, investment, and supply chain resilience. Third one, investing in and connecting people. The fourth one, building a green and sustainable future. And the last one, Canada as an active and engaged partner in the Indo-Pacific region. Under all these themes and pillars, there's over 70 new initiatives that we've committed to take. So obviously I will not list them all here today. I invite you to read our strategy, but I would like to highlight a few examples of initiatives that I think would be of interest to you in particular. So under the first pillar, stability in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, is actually essential to global stability. And that's why we're increasing our engagement in this region as a active, engaged, and trusted security partner. And we were there and we were part of the creation of the ASEAN Regional Forum, and we will continue our decades-long engagement in the forum. But we will also strengthen and do more in terms of our defense cooperation, and we'll deepen our commitments to advancing women, peace, and security agenda. In Indonesia, we are doing so through our military training and cooperation program that offers the TNI professional development courses, language training, and specialized training in peace support operation, humanitarian assistance, and disaster response. This commitment is complemented by participation in exercises and collaborative deployment. And over the last 2 years, we had a Canadian frigate come here to Indonesia, and we can see more, of course, in the future in the region and here. And we are also engaged in terms of peace and security at the police level, in terms of efforts to increase capacity, also in terms of countering terrorism threats. Under the second pillar, expand trade, investment, and supply resilience. The key point is Canada is a trading nation, and we believe in fundamentally the benefits of trading with other countries and of the rules-based international system, which benefits us all and is the basis of our current prosperity. And Canada has many, is has concluded many free trade agreements with, we have CUSMA, which is the Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreement. We have also an agreement with Europe. We also have we're member of the CPTPP. And we're actually, not many people know this, but we're actually the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. So under the IPS, we're actively pursuing negotiations of new economic partnership agreements, including with Indonesia, ASEAN, and India. We're also launching a Canadian trade gateway to Southeast Asia to expand our business-to-business connection and investment. We also will be launching new trade missions here in the region, and will appoint a new Canadian Indo-Pacific trade representative. We will open a new office for agriculture and agri-food in the region to support food security and meet market needs here in the region. And of course, we'll continue to work and contribute to regional effort through APEC to strengthen supply chain resilience and, of course, position Canada as a supplier of clean energy. Invest in and connect people. I like this pillar because when we talk about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I always feel that there's such a connection with one of the priority in the outlook. But for Canada, it has a special meaning because many Canadians have deep personal and family connections to countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And these ties are at the heart of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Actually, close to 18% of Canadians trace their origins to the region, and 60% of the international students coming to Canada now come from the Indo-Pacific. So to strengthen these links, Canada will take a number of actions, including our visa processing capacities in key locations in the region to ease access to students and family members. We'll also leverage our reputation as a top education destination. I have to make this pitch. Please come study in Canada. We have a great institution, and many students from the region are there doing their graduate studies or high school or college studies. And under the Indo-Pacific strategy, we will offer more scholarships for students from the region to go to Canada, including from ASEAN countries. And we will also support active and more opportunities for engagement between academia and civil society groups and organizations. And of course, we will continue to support the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a very important part of our approach to supporting development needs and goals, including in the region. Climate change is a global challenge that requires a global solution. And we're taking ambitious action at home to meet our own commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But in doing that, we will also work with our partners in the region, like Indonesia, to support their own climate and environmental goals. For example, last November, during our Prime Minister's visit here to Indonesia, we announced $48 million worth of new projects, bilateral project between Canada and Indonesia to support climate mitigation and also to support marine protection. And we will launch a new $84 million program to work with partners in the region to address illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We will establish a new initiative to support disaster risk and management and resilience. And we will make significant investment in high quality infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. We're also very happy to be a major supporter of projects such as the Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership to help countries to meet their interest in getting access and transition to cleaner energy. The objective and initiatives I mentioned and describe underline Canada's overarching priority, which is to be an active, engaged, and reliable partner. We're committed to collaboration, and we're motivated by the idea that our future prosperity and security is best served when all countries, large or small, abide by global and regional rules. So this means a sustained investment and engagement at the highest political levels to deepen partnerships. And there were many ministers who came to Indonesia and the region last year, and also our Prime Minister, and this will continue. We're already preparing for the next visit. So we look forward to active Canadian participation in ASEAN this year under the Indonesian chair. Let me conclude with a few points about ASEAN and Indonesia in the context of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. As some of you may know, Canada has been a dialogue partner for ASEAN since 1977. We're founding member of the ASEAN Regional Forum, and we've maintained diplomatic missions in all ASEAN countries, as well as having a dedicated mission to ASEAN here in Jakarta. Our Indo-Pacific strategy clearly reaffirms the centrality of ASEAN in the region, and we will work to align our efforts with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Let me give you a few examples. On maritime cooperation, a new shared ocean fund will support sustainable management of marine resource management. Canada will also reinforce its naval presence and increase participation in regional military exercise to increase maritime safety and security. I'll switch to the next slide. So some people always ask me about data. So I think we were talking about that right before this meeting. So if you'd like to look at some data, this is your slide, and it tells the story about Canada's engagement with ASEAN. But we will be doing more through the strategy. In the area of sustainable infrastructure, we will commit $750 million over 3 years to help mobilize private sector investment in high quality sustainable infrastructure. On the sustainable development goals, since 2001, Canada has provided about $4.4 billion in development assistance to ASEAN and its member states. And in addition to those programs, the Canada ASEAN Action Plan Trust Fund will support priority areas aligned with our Canada ASEAN Action Plan. We'll also expand scholarship opportunities, educational exchanges, and science and technology partnership. And on the trade side, negotiations on an ASEAN-Canada Free Trade Agreement are currently in their third round, and we'll also be launching a series of trade development initiatives. So finally, Canada-Indonesia, an issue that's very dear to my heart. And as someone who spent almost 30 years working on and in the Indo-Pacific region, Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy represents an important opportunity to strengthen our relationship with Indonesia. So let me give you and leave you with 5 key areas of potentials. The first one, political dialogue and policy consultation. Often these goes together. As was demonstrated during Indonesia's successful G20 presidency, we have much to gain by reinforcing our political dialogue on key bilateral, regional, and global issues and challenges. Second, trade and economic cooperation. I have mentioned our ongoing negotiations of free trade agreement. In the context of Indonesia, we call it, the acronym is SIPA. I know in Indonesia people like acronyms. So SIPA is the bilateral free trade agreement that we're currently negotiating with Indonesia. Next week we will undertake our fourth round. A large team of negotiators are coming to Jakarta for that. And this will provide us with a framework. This agreement will provide us with a framework to increase our economic, trade, and investment both ways. And it will be a tool for business people to do that. Third, expanding people-to-people ties is, of course, very central to our long-term goals, including business people, scholars, and students. Fourth, climate change and the clean energy transition represents a major challenge for all countries, but including for Canada and Indonesia as GHG emitters. And together we can work together to find solutions that are of global nature. Finally, the fifth area of potential I see is security cooperation and capacity building in a range of areas, as this is key to maintaining respect for international law and to enhance resilience. So that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to our discussion and to your questions. Terima kasih. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Burger. I think it's very clear and sound explanation about Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which I think very much in line, very much aligned with the ASEAN outlook in Pacific that we have in the region. A lot of areas that we can synergize, definitely. And I think there are a lot of interesting points that is being put in the strategy. Especially, I think if I can highlight a little bit here the term resilience. I think this is something that is very important, as now the global world now is facing a lot of uncertainties, and this term of resilience is something that is very important, and we are very, very look forward as Canada, as the last of the 5 points that you mentioned, Canada is seeking to be an active and engaged partner for the Indo-Pacific. I think this is something that is very, very important as the basis for cooperation. And from the data, I think it's very clear a lot of real commitments has been made by the Canadian government. And this is something I think this is very important in order to nurture the relations among countries in the region. So now I would like to give the first floor to Ambassador Sidharto Suryodipuro to give his comments and inputs and of course the presentation how the synergy can be made, especially as implementing ASEAN outlook on the Pacific is one of the 3 priorities of Indonesia's chairmanship this year, aside to ASEAN matters and epicentrum of growth. And later, Dr. Yose Rizal will talk about more on the economic side, I think, because in the priorities of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy clearly mentioned about the points about expanding trade, investment, supply chain resilience, as well as building sustainable and green future. I think this is something very important. And of course, in the investment in people-to-people ties. Please, Ambassador Suryodipuro.
Good morning, everybody. Selamat pagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Also, good morning to those that are participating online. I'd like to begin by thanking the CSIS for the invitation for me to discuss at this seminar together with Pa Yose Rizal. But above all, I'd like to also thank Ambassador Nadia Burger for her presentation on Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. I think my presentation will overlap to a significant degree with what you were saying, Ambassador Burger. It is our view that ASEAN and Canada are now working towards the establishment of an action-oriented, mutually beneficial, and substantive strategic partnership this year. A further understanding of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is thus very helpful, as our discussion this morning will be. And this is also valuable considering that ASEAN and Canada last year entered its 45th year of partnership. It's one of the oldest partners of ASEAN in the region. As countries around the world develop their own Indo-Pacific strategies, many focus on major power dynamics vying for spheres of influence. As a collection of small and middle power countries at the heart of the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN's main objective have always been to secure the intention of all regional powers, of the major powers, to ensure that ASEAN remains relevant. The path ASEAN chooses is not that of passive acceptance, but it has always been an active engagement with all its partners. The ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific focuses on the collective commitments to regional peace and building trust through collaborative efforts. ASEAN does not define the geographical boundaries of the Indo-Pacific region. Rather, it defines the Indo-Pacific through inclusive participation in the various ASEAN platforms that has nurtured over the decades. And in doing so, ASEAN also reasserts the concept of ASEAN centrality as the underlying principle for promoting cooperation in the region. With the AOIP and all the Indo-Pacific strategies out there, herein lies a question for Canada and ASEAN. How can we and how can ASEAN's AOIP and Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy collaborate and to be in line with ASEAN centrality in supporting ASEAN centrality? Many initiatives and areas of cooperation are highlighted in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, as Ambassador Burger had presented earlier. The importance of various functional cooperation for ASEAN and Canada partnership are beyond doubt. They should be pursued with vigor and energy, and certainly not to be taken for granted. The collaboration between Canada's strategy and the AOIP should enable both sides to address the geopolitical realities that is shaping a growing distrust among countries and increasing tensions among major powers. This is the context that we are operating in. From another perspective, how can we in ASEAN help Canada create its own strategic space in the region beyond a corollary of an alliance system? I believe we had this in a while back, and I believe we have the intention, we have the energy to do so again. ASEAN and Canada can and should make a difference. In Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy paper, the term ASEAN centrality was mentioned 3 times in the entire document. Looking at the players under Canada's strategy paper, ASEAN is seated on the last of the list after China, India, Japan, South Korea, the latter 2 bundled together as North Pacific. This provides a sense of how ASEAN centrality figures in Canada's strategic outlook. To manifest it in timely and more actionable manner by implementing Our challenge is to manifest it in a timely and more actionable manner by implementing strategic deliverables that address the need of each ASEAN members. One thing is clear, we do not intend to simply recognize ASEAN centrality. ASEAN and Canada's partnership should be valued on its own merit, serve as the foundation of beneficial relations between Canada and the region, even bilaterally between Canada and each individual member states. So within this context, to turn the potential areas of cooperation between ASEAN and Canada under Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship, there are a number of things that we can do. The first is on food security. Canada possesses a comparative advantage as the largest potash producing country, and we know potash is critical for fertilizer, as well as one of the world's largest producer of other critical commodities like wheat and soybean. Canada's plan to open its first agriculture and agri-food office in the region under its Indo-Pacific strategy are very much welcome. The office may strengthen Canada's place in supporting regional food security in today's uncertain world, including disruptions in global supply chain and climate change. ASEAN-Canada's partnership in food resilience could pursue to be invaluable, including in times of crisis. Canada should take a look at it, ASEAN should look at it as among the great opportunities. The second point that we can work on is Canada's support to realize in a concrete way the theme of ASEAN as an epicentrum of growth. Under the banner of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, Indonesia as chair will organize several events throughout the year. And two that I would like to highlight under this forum is the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, as well as the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum that will take place in September at the sideline of the 43rd ASEAN and related summits. The ASEAN Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum aims to generate business deals and support economic growth in the region, and participation from Canada's business leaders is more than welcome. And Ambassador Boucher also talked about this and how the government intends to pursue the matter. The focus of the Infrastructure Forum is on green infrastructure, digital transformation, and sustainable financing. Canada is one of the world's leaders in these fields. We are delighted to learn that Canada's businesses are coming to Indonesia next week for the Canada-ASEAN Business and Investment Forum. This will be an event that will support and lead to a successful convening of ASEAN Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum, as well as serve as a momentum for businesses to start exploring strategic partnerships. This we can be sure of. I also took note of Canada's significant potential in the area of energy transition. It has abundant resources in critical minerals such as cobalt and lithium. Canada can support and collaborate with the region in developing certain fields like electric vehicle ecosystem that we in ASEAN are pursuing, and renewable energy. And the third area for cooperation in the context of Canada and ASEAN partnership and in the context of our respective Indo-Pacific strategies is that the ASEAN-Canada partnership should be built on the strength of Indonesia-Canada partnership. The progress in the negotiations of the Indonesia-Canada CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, will create such a momentum. We hope in Indonesia that it can be finalized soon. And moving forward, I hope to see Canada's increased contribution to the region as an equal and independent partner of ASEAN. And I think from Ambassador Bourget's presentation earlier, we can be hopeful and optimistic of this. Canada is also a potential partner to explore cooperation in environmental and climate change. We noted the Canadian government and businesses have already established offices in Singapore. It may be worth considering expanding those offices to other ASEAN capitals to help Canada truly understand the nuances of the region and the unique behavior of each of the markets. We can help Canada do so further. We appreciate the active engagement of Canada's several provinces, such as Quebec and Saskatchewan, to deepen their partnership in the region. And furthermore, we also appreciate the support from a number of Canadian entities, such as the Canadian Crown Corporation, that would include Canadian Commercial Corporation, as well as several pension funds, the CPPIB, the CDPQ, through a meaningful engagement and investment in Indonesia. And of course, we would be remiss if we don't invite further investments from Canada to Indonesia and to the region, because it's one of the key indicators for us to know that this region truly matters to Canada and can help spur growth in both ASEAN and Canada. Finally, let me thank Ambassador Bourget and Canada's missions to Indonesia and to ASEAN. Also to thank the CSIS in support of the realization of the matters that we are discussing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Ambassador Sidharto. I think there are very important points there in your remarks, Pa. And definitely, I think there are two things that if I can highlight a little bit on the ASEAN centrality, particularly on how the collaboration between Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy and AYP can actually support ASEAN centrality. And the second thing also, amidst the alliance system, how Indonesia and Canada can actually have the strategic space. I think this is something very important. And you also elaborate on the very specific and very practical areas where the collaboration can actually be done, particularly between Indonesia and Canada. And now, last but not least, of course, I would like to invite my Executive Director from CSIS, Dr. Damuri, his comments and
Okay.
It's by Yose.
Thank you, Lina. A very good morning to ladies, to distinguished ladies and gentlemen who already would like to spend your morning actually here in CSIS. We are honored to have you here to discuss about the very important matters, the Canadian strategy on Indo-Pacific. And I would like also to congratulate Ambassador Bourget and also to thank you to share with us about the Canada strategy on Indo-Pacific. And I think that's really useful for us to get more understanding, greater understandings about the importance of this strategy and how to strengthen relationship between Canada and these regions. I would like to divide my comments into three parts. The first one in more general of Indo-Pacific, and then the second part on the Canadian strategy, especially the ones related to economic aspect, and the third So on the ASEAN's role and also perhaps AOIP. Let me start by sharing a story related to this event. Actually, this is quite I found it quite interesting because when we're trying to promote our today's events, we put it in the social media. Ambassador Burger. And then there is a comment actually in our social media who mentions that, who asks us why we keep calling this region Indo-Pacific. We do have our own terms, Asia-Pacific. I think it seems to be a random comment, but I guess it's also many also share the same feeling, the same thinking about it. Why shift things from the Asia-Pacific toward Indo-Pacific? And I believe this kind of questions or this kind of feeling not only about the fact that the term Indo-Pacific was popularized by the US. It's more than that. It's also because the impression that it brings. When we're talking about Asia-Pacific, what we have in mind is the spirit of cooperation. Maybe because in the 80s and the 90s, when these terms was popularized, the Asia-Pacific, these regions was just entering a peaceful and stability period. And then we're talking about cooperations, a lot of cooperations at that time. But the term Indo-Pacific brings some kind of the impressions of competitions. And I think Safia also mentions about rivalry, and this is the things why Indo-Pacific perhaps is seen to be quite different, especially from the people in this region. And fortunately, of course, luckily we have this kind of evolutions. The term Indo-Pacific itself already evolved quite a lot. Nowadays, as we've seen from the Canadian strategy on Indo-Pacific, we see more and more cooperations being discussed in this strategy. Many other countries' strategy on Indo-Pacific also try to promote more cooperations instead of only competitions. And I think this is a really good progress, and we still need to do more for sure about it, on how to promote Indo-Pacific, not only as a regions when the competitions and rivalry between major power takes place, but also the regions that brings opportunity for cooperations in the future, because the cooperations in future cooperations is not only more preferable, but also is very much needed. The words and all of us is actually facing a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that we can only overcome with greater cooperations. So I'm really glad to see that I think most of the part of the Canada's strategy on Indo-Pacific is about cooperations, including also cooperations to promote security, peace, and stability in this region. So that's my first comment on the Indo-Pacific in general. My second part of the comment is on the several pillars that already mentioned by Ambassador Burger on especially it is quite interesting for me that the second pillar is on the trade and supply chain resilience. I think this is quite important aspect because although we know that the world economy is still doing quite well at the moment, despite some challenges. But it's very risky, especially in the supply chains side, and the risk is quite high. So looking at this pillar, I guess we still need to do a lot of things in order to strengthen the supply chain and trade and investment relations between Canada and these regions. I look at the figures of trade relations between Canada and ASEAN, for example, and the import of Canada from ASEAN only accounts for less than 20 billion US dollars, around 18 billion US dollars in 2021, while import from Canada accounts for more than 70 billion US dollar. It means that there is a concentration of supply chain, the supply chain that comes from certain economy only, which is China. And diversification is a key for improving resilience, and diversification is the way that we need to pursue. But the diversification is not only needed among these regions, but also among ASEAN region. It's interesting that 40% of Canada's import actually comes from Vietnam. So we're not only talking about concentrations at the regional level, the wider regional level, but even among ASEAN, it is quite concentrated. So the diversifications among ASEAN countries is also quite needed. But how to do that? This is going to be an important point that we need to look at, or to discuss even more, because in the end, the economic relations is about business relations. It's not about government to government relation. The government only can facilitate the activities, but how the business can take up the opportunity, and how the business can also have the capacity to carry out more economic relations or business relations. I think the Canada strategy on these pillars would also support the strengthening not only the supply chain itself, but also the capacity of the capacity of the business sectors in the regions. So in addition to the trade agreement, maybe we also still need to have capacity building, technical assistance, in order for the business player in these regions, in Indonesia or in many other ASEAN countries, can fulfill the need or the requirements from the Canadian side. Yeah, it's also quite interesting to see the sustainable and green future to be included into the strategy. I think what we have is already quite advanced in promoting the sustainable future and sustainable economy. But again, in the end, what matters is the implementations at the business level, so that the programs and the activities perhaps should encourage and be able to multiply it at the stakeholder level, encouraging stakeholders to take part more into the sustainable activities. And in these regions, unfortunately, the awareness itself is still very low. We just completed a survey actually last year, asking the respondents, around 2,000 respondents across Indonesia about the low carbon economy, and only 2% that sees climate challenge is a big one of the biggest challenge, and they still not really willing to pay more or to put more activities into the low carbon economy, and so we still have to do a lot in these regions about this sustainable future, and I believe the Canada would help a lot in realizing the sustainable and low carbon economy in these regions. The third ones on the ASEAN outlook in Indo-Pacific. I believe Pak Arto also already mentions a lot about this, but I guess the beauty of AOIP is one of them is that it managed to change the spirit or the narrative of Indo-Pacific. Before the ASEAN AOIP, the narrative of Indo-Pacific, as I mentioned, it's because of the competitions and rivalry and exclusions of certain parties. But the OIP bring the narrative into more cooperations and more inclusive and open. And I think this is also in lines with the Canada strategy. So those two regions should hand in hand cooperate and collaborate and to promote this kind of narrative of cooperations in these regions, and learning from the past experience. Most of the ASEAN initiative actually can be more effective and also be useful to the regions if those initiative becoming a wider initiative, have the partners to be involved more actively. I believe the ASEAN and Canada can also promote the spirit of cooperations in these regions, and also to deal with many other challenges that we have in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Yose. I think very clear points there, and very important points that you raised. Especially first, you open it with the point that why Indo-Pacific, right? I think we know some major countries then tend to emphasize, or we already have, as you said, the Asia-Pacific. Well, I think we can always interpret it differently. Sometimes you say Indo, the term Indo can refer to India, but as we are Indonesia, we can also say Indo-Pacific as Indonesia as well. You know, it depends how you see it. But then, of course, the point that you make, what is very key is how the ASEAN outlook on the Pacific can actually help to change the narrative from competition to cooperation. And this is something that that's why I mentioned it in the beginning. I think the role of middle powers here very important to help changing the narrative. And definitely, I think the support from major powers and middle powers to ASEAN initiatives, this is something that is very, very key in order to help changing the idea from competition to cooperation. And you mentioned about the point on diversification of supplies. This is something very important on how the economic cooperation can be enhanced, and the provision of capacity building. I think this is something also very, very important in a lot of areas, including particularly the current issue that we are facing on how to pursue towards sustainable and low carbon energy for a better future of the world. I think with that, I would like now to open the floor for questions, comments. I see. Oh, okay, very good. This is quite a rare opportunity to see a lot of hands already in the air. We have plenty of time, don't worry. I opened the first floor for, let me see, from this side. 1, 2, 3. Okay. You take it for the second round first. 1, 2, 3. And here 1, 2, 3. I make it equal. Okay. At the front, please. Please identify yourself and state your question, comment straightforward.
Morning, from Edita from Asian Youth. Can I ask from the Ibu Nadia dan Pak Sidharto, related from Canada strategy and ASEAN, can I explain for agenda youth and climate from the Canada and Asian from the event this year? This one.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Muhammad Rifki Daneswara. I'm from Indonesian Institute of Advanced International Studies, or INADIS. My question is to His Excellency Ambassador Nadia. Two questions actually. The first one is regarding Canada Indo-Pacific strategy itself. It is being described that one of the pillar, the peace security, is the increased military presence of Canada in the regions. It is not unique. Many other Indo-Pacific strategies, the French, Netherlands, Germany, and Italy has also described increased military presence in the region. But what I would like to ask is that increased military presence could also lead to increased tension and conflict, and that's what we, Indonesia, want to avoid. So what I would like to ask for my first question is how Canada could shape the increased military presence, but as a building block for improving peace and security in the region, not increasing tension. The second, my second question is regarding the lack of conflict resolution in the region. I believe that only France in the Pacific strategy that have stated clearly that France wants to become an active player in resolving regional security conflict. And I believe that there's a lack of it in the Canada, in this Indo-Pacific strategy. I would like to ask, is this part of Canada Indo-Pacific strategy of not involving too much itself in regional conflict, or is there any other way for it? Thank you.
I'm Suzy Sudarman from University of Indonesia and INADIS. I would like to address this question to Ambassador Nadia. Following up on Dr. Yose Damuri's wonderful conception, this sort of reminds me of what Canada has contributed to the world. R2P, G20 are concepts from Canada. I think we should follow up on Damuri's idea on cooperation and capacity building, that Canada can work with universities around ASEAN, and we can snowball the idea and become a new idea that comes from Canada, following up on R2P and G20 ideas. I just want you to comment. Is that a possibility for things like this to emerge? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this event. I want to speak. Actually, I want to ask Dr. Honorables from Canada, Nadia. Actually, it's like more into the bilateral between Indonesia and Canada. I think it's, Canada is more outstanding in their platform website in the ASEAN instead of Indonesia. And the trade volume is, in 2019, is only 1.4 billion. Indonesia and Canada has a talk about the small, medium entrepreneur, especially women's, and there is an ongoing since 2009 that Canada is really promoting a democracy when it comes to the political, because Indonesia is a multi-party and there's a friendship and talk, whether it can be involved like CSIS or other independents to the parliament, and how that is going to be lasting from year to year, because women's in politics in Indonesia are quite, I think there is a goal in the national has to be 30%, which is, I wrote my article, especially in my hometown, is that women is only about 1-2% politics, and this is part maybe of the export developments that Canada are thinking about.
Sorry, can you identify yourself, your name and your institution?
I'm just a lecturer right now. I have a business, small business in Jakarta and in my hometown in Padang.
What's your name, Pak? Sorry.
Matthias.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ishana from President University. I would like to ask a question to Ambassador Buje. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name, Your Excellency. Okay, so my question is, what does Canada have in store for Timor-Leste in terms of education, job opportunities, and economic partnerships? Timor-Leste, we know, doesn't even have its own currency despite being independent for almost 21 years. And its income sources are not diversified, as it is still heavily, it still heavily depends on petroleum, and its young people move overseas due to lack of job opportunities. And what are Canada's plans to improve the condition in Timor-Leste now that it's an ASEAN member? That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Andrew from CSIS, Department of International Relations. I have two questions. First question is to Ambassador Nadia, and the second question is to Pak Arto. The first question is regarding our situation now in the region, which is Myanmar. You mentioned Myanmar as one of the strategic challenges in the first paragraph of the document. But looking deeper into the document, I only see Myanmar mentioned in the pillar of investing and connecting people. And thank you, Ibu Susi, for mentioning the idea of R2P that is coming from Canada originally. So can you elaborate more on how would you approach a situation in Myanmar in particular, or situation like Myanmar if happens again in the region? And second is to Pak Arto. If we have seen the growing ideas and document on Indo-Pacific, many countries has mentioned about naval presence, and from my understanding, it will some sort of create the dynamics on our maritime security. And what would be the ASEAN answer to this trend? Do you think that this is time for ASEAN to have more robust cooperation in terms of maritime security in sort of anticipating the growing initiatives and ideas and sort of presence in terms of naval and maritime security forces in the region? So what would be the ASEAN answer to these to the maritime security issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think very, very good questions especially to Ambassador Buje. Particularly on the youth, education, and involvement in regional conflict. I think a lot of issues there. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent and varied numerous questions. I was very glad there was one for Pak Arto. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, everybody, for the very impressive range of questions. I remember when I arrived in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and I was so impressed that all people would meet with the sophistication of the understanding of the region and the depth and breadth of questions. So this is just a wonderful opportunity to see this in action. Shall I just start word and then we'll end on Myanmar? Does that work, Arto? So in terms of the issue of youth, thank you for asking. Youth is very dear to my heart because I really believe in the importance of investing in youth. They're the future, future decision makers, future leaders, and the world that we leave to the next generation, it needs to be in a good shape. And the Indo-Pacific strategy has a number of elements in it that address and supports youth engagement. So for example, there's a scholarship program that we have under there. We call it an acronym is the SEED scholarship. So it's Scholarship for Educational Exchange and Development. We've already started this program, but we're expanding it, and it's a program that is available to all ASEAN member state students. And we're hoping to get, once we have the expanded part of the program fully in place, to have hundreds of students, new students that can go to Canada and study. And obviously under all of the pillars that I've mentioned, all the objectives, of course, youth figures in one way or another. When we talk about climate change, climate adaptation, when we talk about negotiating trade agreements, this is all to give opportunities for youth and the next generation. So this is a very important part of what we're doing. In terms of military presence, I think for us, military deployment and joint operation always have peace in mind. This is our sole purpose. So we are a peace-seeking nation. We're a contributor to peacekeeping operation. That's our primary goal. And through these deployments, we've been doing naval deployments by the Royal Canadian Navy in the region for decades. They're always peaceful, and it's always with that intent. So we will continue to do it in that regard. And in terms of looking at my list here of questions, the issue of R2P G20, thank you for flagging this. Not many people know that, the link of Canada as coming up with the idea of the G20 and R2P. And of course, there was a lot of initiatives throughout the past decades that we've undertook. Capacity building and engaging universities. Yes, absolutely. There's actually a reference in the strategy about that. We want more engagement between academia, think tanks, researchers. The Asia-Pacific Foundation in Canada will also establish an office in the region. So there's absolutely an intention on our part to use the strategy to increase these connections. And in our mind, we actually can use this to advance a number of our shared interests and priorities. In terms of the trade, SMEs, women, these are great, very important themes. SMEs, of course, our intention is to continue to support SMEs through the trade pillar that we have as part of the strategy. There's so many initiatives under there. I don't want to mention all of them, but I can certainly think of the gateway as one of the mechanisms to increase our support to SMEs. Trade missions, of course, will target SMEs, and we also have mechanisms in Canada to support SMEs who want to come to the market here. On women, absolutely. Thank you for raising that, and I'm very grateful for it. This is a very important priority for Canada domestically, and of course, in terms of our foreign policy. We have a prime minister that calls himself a feminist prime minister, and we have a feminist foreign policy and a feminist international assistance policy. And if you look at our cabinet composition, you will see that our prime minister has made sure that half of the cabinet members were women, and that we had a lot of diversity within our cabinet. So that is an issue that is very dear to the Canadian government. And as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, we will continue to prioritize and support the empowerment of women and all groups that can contribute. And we believe that's a good thing. We believe we can only achieve our full potential if everybody's fully included. And there's actually a lot of studies on that done in Canada that shows that if you have a diversity in your organization, be it private or government, you will achieve better results and you will have higher rates of not only human resource performance, but also economic performance for private companies. In terms of, where are we? Almost at the end of the question. Timor-Leste, thank you for raising that question. So we were there at, we've been engaged with Timor-Leste for many years. We're still supporting Timor-Leste as goal of development, and our engagement is done through a number of means. We contribute through multilateral institution. We have also small bilateral programming envelope that Rizal sitting here is managing. So if you have any questions, I recommend you speak to him. And we have a conversation with them on a regular basis, either multilaterally or bilaterally when we see them in Dili, or even here last week, Pak Arto and I were at an event with Timor-Leste officials. And certainly we engage also on women empowerment, and any issues that we see shared interest, really. And on Myanmar, I never want to speculate on what could or could not happen in the future, but certainly our position is that we're very concerned about the situation. We condemn the coup and of course the violence against peaceful demonstrator, and we fully support ASEAN's effort towards the implementation of the 5-point consensus.
Very few questions for me, but you know why I'm pleased to listen the range of questions. I think it's important for you, for Ambassador Burger, to understand the breadth and depth among the Indonesian this community of affairs that are sitting here and probably participating online. So it's I think that is helpful for you also to understand the Indonesian public in relation to Canada. I think there was a question about youth activities, and there are a number of things that we are doing. Indonesia as chair of ASEAN. The first is that we are engaging with an organization called Indonesian Youth Diplomacy. It's also an organization, youth organization, engaged in G20 activities last year. So they hold activities throughout Indonesia. So we are very happy to be working with them. And then there's also the ASEAN Youth Organization. We are also working with them to promote activities as well as awareness about ASEAN, and also to promote ASEAN as a people-centered organization. We have a youth dialogue, part of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, a youth dialogue for sustainable development. That is also being held, and I think an activity will take place sometime in March or April, that will bring ASEAN youth together for a dialogue, and also to understand what would be the demand of youth in the workplace of the future. And I think this is something that is of interest to many of the youth of today. And turning to the issue brought up by Andrew, and that is about the growing naval presence in our region. First of all, that is a reality of ASEAN being one of the most strategic maritime space in the world, in which the security and the prosperity of many countries depend on access through and access to Southeast Asia. So we understand this. But at the same time, it also brings a challenge to ASEAN itself. One of the things to look at is on international law. So how do we strengthen cooperation in ASEAN on international law? The UN Convention on Law of the Sea is one of them, but it's not the only one. So how do we strengthen awareness and understanding about the number of relevant legal instruments related to our maritime space? Ultimately, it's about how to ensure the Southeast Asia as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. Under ZOFAN, there's the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia. There's the Treaty of Southeast Asia as a nuclear weapons-free zone. Maybe it's time for us to develop another instrument in relation to the maritime space. So this is something that through diplomatic channels that we have to develop. We have to look at developing norms for our region on the basis of UNCLOS, but also on the basis of other relevant laws relating to the maritime space. And maybe it's also time for the region to declare what those norms are, just like we declare that our region is a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. We declare that Southeast Asia, we are a region of amity and cooperation. So maybe it's time also to look at how to develop norms on the maritime space. We have the AOIP, but we should also look deeper into these issues. When it comes to strengthening cooperation on, particularly on naval cooperation, we have the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting. I think any kind of cooperation will be built on the issues that it is discussing now. So I think I'll stop there on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Arto. Now I would like to open the second floor for questions, comments. Yeah, one question, two question, three. From my right-hand side, is there any other question? Okay, if not, then I'll start from the front one. No, it's from the front first, sorry. Please kindly identify yourself and your institution. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Akil from the Jakarta Post Daily. So my question is for the Her Excellency Madam Ambassador and for Pak Arto. For Madam Ambassador, my first question is this Canada is not, as of course, not alone in publishing its Indo-Pacific strategies, while if we may recall, Foreign Minister Retno also warned in that a lot of countries has Indo-Pacific concept, but they should be synergized to not exacerbate, to make rivalries become worse. So what Canada's view on how to make sure that these different Indo-Pacific strategies and concepts should not make a rivalry worse in the region? And for Pak Arto, the question is quite similar. So how Indonesia and response to these many Indo-Pacific strategies that many countries have, and how Indonesia could synergize them with perhaps ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Iswanto Rusdi from Namarin. Pak Arto, selamat pagi. We meet again. My question, I think, is not a heavy question, just a small one. Pak Arto, in many news reports about naval situation in the Southeast China Sea, it seems to me that our TNI AL, our Bakamla, sometimes our Marine Police is just offside. I mean, they comment too much. I don't know. How do you see the understanding of international law, as you mentioned earlier, whether they understand UNCLOS or not? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dewi from Indonesian Institute of Advanced International Studies, INADIS. Speaking about Indonesia plus Indo-Pacific region, I think we cannot separate it from the issue about maritime and ocean. So my question here is, how will Indonesia describe the three main pillars of ASEAN through Indonesia's chairmanship in ASEAN 2023 regarding the blue economy, which was also declared on the ASEAN Summit on 2021? And particularly, how is Indonesia's team strategy through ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific region? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the different strategies, it is true that a few other countries and ASEAN has an Indo-Pacific strategy. In our view, and if you look at the content, I was just talking earlier today about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and our own strategy, and there's so much synergies and areas of commonality. Just look at our invest in and connect people pillar, and you have a connectivity pillar in the ASEAN outlook for Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot of shared thematics and shared goals in strategies covering the region. And if there's differences, Canada's view is that they're complementary. We're complementary. Our approach is one of we see benefit in being more engaged and also more present in practical terms, and also in terms of consulting each other on developments in the region, so that we're advancing our shared interests together. And it's really a collaborative approach from our perspective. In terms of the other questions, I think they were more related to you, Pak Arto, so I'll let you comment on the others.
I'd like to, on the Indo-Pacific strategies, refer to what Jose was telling us earlier about how the AOIP is changing the narrative. And this is a narrative of inclusivity, of focusing on common interest rather than focusing on differences. And, you know, for Indonesia, Indo-Pacific, while the AOIP might be just a few years old, but the practice of Indo-Pacific for Indonesia in the region, I think began with the establishment of the East Asia Summit This goes back almost 20 years ago. It was on Indonesia's insistence that India was included. So the Indo could be India, could be Indian Ocean, in which Indonesia is a significant part of it. So we have practiced Indo-Pacific without calling it Indo-Pacific for 20 years now. It is basically the same approach, how to have an inclusive participation, focusing on cooperation among the 10 ASEAN countries, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and India. And then in 2011, we also added the United States and the Russian Federation into it. So this is our practice of the Indo-Pacific, and now synergizing, changing the narrative is about, first of all, building on the capital of Southeast Asia. This is a region of 600 plus million people. Collectively, it's the 5th largest economy. It is one of the brightest spot today in the global economy. And it is also growing in terms of the economic ladder. It is going up the ladder. It has a vision for the region that would be quite ambitious. It is central, and it will be more central. That's why our focus is on how to, for our partners, Canada not the least, to invest in this region. And when I say invest, it's not only making investment in infrastructure or manufacturing or other things, meaningful as they are, but investment in the relationship and investment in the region, Southeast Asia, and also investment in making this region, so for Canada to become a stakeholder in the region's stability and prosperity, and for Canada and all our partners to respect the others in ensuring Southeast Asia remains prosperous and stable, because it is in the interest of all our partners to ensure that their interest is well protected in such a way. So this is basically the idea of synergizing the Indo-Pacific strategy and changing the narrative. Turning to Pa Rusdi's question, first of all, it's very good to see you here, Pa. We haven't seen each other after quite a long time. Basically, the presence of foreign ships, naval or otherwise, in our waters, in the region waters, would be in line with the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. For Indonesia, we are consistent with it, and we understand the different regimes of UNCLOS, whether it's on Indonesian territorial waters, or it's in the archipelagic sea lanes, the exclusive economic zones. We are conscious on all of that. Our maritime law enforcement agencies, the TNI, Indonesian Navy, they are quite aware of the regimes existing under UNCLOS. But as I said earlier, addressing the question by Andrew Montong, there is definitely a growing challenge to ensuring that our maritime space remains stable, and that we of the region can build norms that are our own, that will support Southeast Asia as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. We can always further discuss this offline. And finally, on blue economy, This year, we have plans to develop an ASEAN Blue Economy Framework. The ASEAN Blue Economy Framework is built on the Indonesian Blue Economy Framework. So hopefully once it is agreed by leaders, it will contain more or less same elements. So the ASEAN Blue Economy Framework will be supportive of Indonesia's own endeavors in blue economy and vice versa. So this is an ongoing process. But let me say that ASEAN's attention to ocean matters, to blue economy matters, are now, I would say, about 20 or more years old. So we are very conscious of the nature of our region as a maritime region and the importance of blue economy and blue economy as a new engine of growth.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
I just want to just pick up a bit on what was just mentioned and say that we also see the benefit and the value of the blue economy, and we're also engaged. And on the issue of deployments and military naval presence, just to also reiterate the point that from our perspective also, these deployments are completely consistent with international law and UNCLOS. That's a very important thing for Canada. We are a strong believer in the rules-based international system and international law, and we certainly advocated in every area, including not only trade, but also on the security front. We're so following these very important values and principles.
Okay, we come almost to the end of the event of the seminar. Is there any other question? Oh, not. Okay, I think we only have 15 minutes, and I have one my own question, if I may still have. Bapak, okay, Wafa, okay, but have to be very quick, okay? Andrew and Pak Matthias. Okay, please.
Very merci pour son excellent Ambassador Burger pour votre excellent exposé. And Ambassador Suryodipuro, thank you also for your insight. And Pak Yose Rizal, thank you, and my congratulations for now leading the CSIS. I'm now in the private sector. And what I want to see from both sides, Indonesia and Canada, regarding the Indo-Pacific, is how you develop your role as a game changer, not a game player anymore. Because my client, private sector, is now waiting. As Pak Suryodipuro already mentioned that ASEAN will be the capital of Southeast Asia. We want to see in the next future how we can develop business through the channeling from one spot to another spot, like supply chain, global, not global, but larger region global supply chains into the region up to Marshall Island, Fiji, etc., because some of my client also dealing with tourism. You see, in Caribbean, the tourism, the cruising is developed, and now people want to see if we can go also to Fiji from ASEAN, etc. That's my general question.
Okay.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Wafa Karisma from CSIS, Department of International Relations. So just a very quick question to Ambassador Nadia Burger. When looking at strategic documents like this, of course, one of the first things that we see is, and try to identify, is how Canada identifies the strategic challenges, right? So my question is about ASEAN centrality. Of course, a lot of the Indo-Pacific strategies, it's almost politically incorrect if they don't mention ASEAN centrality in the document. But just very quickly, do you expect that the worth of ASEAN centrality is synonymous to ASEAN's ability to provide answers to some of the strategic challenges that you mentioned in this strategic document? Because you mentioned like Korean Peninsula. Is it increasingly, do countries increasingly view ASEAN centrality as synonymous to ASEAN's ability to answer these strategic challenges that you listed? And of course, it relates to questions like how premier do Canada see like forums such as the Asian Regional Forum, ASEAN, the ASEAN Regional Forum as well. You mentioned here as well that Canada is trying to enter at the AMM Plus and East Asia Summit. How premier are these forums for you? Thank you.
I think it's my question is still on the small medium enterprise. When it comes to Indonesia, I just want to know whether you can elaborate it on the finance credit, because I know Australia has some banking in Indonesia and they are going for that initiative and grow for this small medium enterprise. Because in general, Indonesia is banking is mostly occupied and monopolized by the BUMN bank, and these are not performs and targeting the women and small medium. So it's very hard for them to get the finance when they have really already, maybe they want to establish their own small enterprise. China are very strong in that. Even they go for the pay later or some sort of credit. How Canada bankings are.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Me again, Andrew from CSIS. One small questions about the assumption of the strategy. I just finished research with Gilang here, and we are working with the European Union on their Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly on their steps in South China Sea. And one of our important finding is to understand that from the Southeast Asian perspective, if we want to see other actor getting involved in the region, we don't want to see them as the secondary or the sheriff of the United States. And from my understanding of various Indo-Pacific strategies, sometimes it is taken for granted that the United States is staying power and it's a stable power. So what do you think that the United States factor here? Do you think that their presence and their quality of, for example, human rights and democracy is kind of stable to be taken for granted as your important ally in the region? So with that question, I would also like to ask for the Canadian situations. Sometimes for making such a strategy, the most important point is the mobilization. And one of the biggest questions for the United States is whether your strategy can be sold to your own citizen, where importantly there are trends like anti-Americanism, shootings against their own citizens, with the uncontrollable of gun situations in the United States. With regards to this kind of situation and the link between domestic and your strategic level at international level, how do you think the domestic constituents of Canadian would support your idea? And how do you work with your closest ally like the United States and the European Union with their own domestic problem as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Andrew. If I may add a little bit, one question to Pak Yose actually, because you mentioned about diversification of supplies. How do you see the current trend of nationalistic economic policy, which may put a stumbling block to the open, inclusive, cooperative Indo-Pacific concept? Thank you. So with that, I would like, I think a lot of questions also here. Ambassador Burger, please.
Thank you. There's just so much to cover with the range of questions that I'm afraid you said 5 minutes ago, we only had 15 minutes. So let me try to maybe summarize to the essence and bring all these pieces together. So let me just, if I may just make a very important point, which is Canada has 70 years, we celebrated last year 70 years of diplomatic relationship with Indonesia.
We celebrated 45 years of diplomatic relations and engagement with ASEAN as a dialogue partner. We very much value these relationships, and Indonesia and the region is important to Canada and Canadians. And we're already engaged. Before the strategy, we've been engaged in a wide range of areas, from development, peace and security, economic, trade, investment, clean technology. The list is very long. We have frameworks for these. We have a plan of action, Canada, Indonesia plan of action that we signed last year. We also have a plan of action, Canada, ASEAN. So there's already a lot of activities. But I always say there's much more we can do to reach our full human and economic potential. And the Indo-Pacific strategy is a great tool and is an answer to that. And when we talk about tourism, small and medium enterprises, ASEAN centrality, if you look and you can read in the document that we distributed today, which is this strategy, if you go to the end of the last section of the document, you'll see the some of the concrete new projects we're putting in place that are focused on these things. And of course, we've announced a strategy last November. Some things have already started, new activities have already started, but others we're also implementing now, and we're developing how to implement them. So it will be, there's lots more to come, is my message. And certainly we recognize and very much value our engagement and our relationship with the region, but also I have to also say with Indonesia, because it's a very important country for Canada, and we very much value our bilateral relationship and our conversation that we have here, and including with think tanks.
Yes, I think, well, protectionisms, nationalisms, and other things, I think it's quite common at the moment, not only in the developing countries, but also in many developed countries that previously becomes the champions of open market and open economy. Now they started to go on with a more restrictive measures in trade, in investments, in many other economic aspects. But I guess what we can do is first to realize that this is a very costly situation. Yeah. It might be quite preferable from each country's perspective, but if everybody is doing it, it's going to be very costly to the economy and also to the world in general, because it would lead to many other issues, many other challenges that might not be easily solved. One of the recent study from the WTO, for example, tried to look at the impact of decoupling and all these kind of economic nationalisms. They predict that it might cost the global economy up to 12% of the economy, the economic value. It's quite very significant in terms of value. But more interestingly, if you look at who's gonna be the most disadvantaged parties, are the ones that has a low income and low technology acquisitions. In the end, the greatest victims of all this decoupling, all these nationalisms, are the less developed economies. We don't want to have this kind of situations happening. So that we need to to promote the spirit of cooperations, including also in these regions, in the Indo-Pacific and Southeast Asian region.
Thank you very much, Pak Yose. I think we come to the end of the discussions today. I don't want to make any conclusion. I think a lot of ideas there, and all of us here can make our own conclusion from our discussion. Very rich and very deep discussion, in-depth discussions that we have. And with that, I think I would like to thank you for being here. If I can tell Ambassador Nadia and Ambassador Art also, we have almost full house here. We have around 20. So in total, we almost around have 70 to 80 people attending this morning. It is not easy. It is a Friday morning. So we are very glad to have everyone staying until the end of the session. Thank you very much once again, and look forward to seeing all of you in other CSIS events. Thank you very much.